So thank you for being with us. Welcome. I'm Ben Wilson. I'm the retired chair of the Beveridge and Diamond Law Firm, and for 18 years an adjunct professor of environmental law here at the Howard University School of Law. We have a very special program today, our first ever. We hope it will become annual Charlotte E. Ray lecture and a white-collar crime conference to boot. And there's one thing I do wish to say very briefly. I think you'll hear more about Charlotte Ray, but suffice to say, as the first woman lawyer admitted to the bar of the District of Columbia, Charlotte Ray was denied opportunity based on her race and based on her gender. Here at Howard University, over 70% of our first-year class is made up of women, overwhelmingly women of color. And the hope, of course, and the expectation is that these women, the Charlotte Rays of today, will have every opportunity that was denied her. And I want to thank our Assistant Attorney General, our United States attorneys, our leading practitioners all across America, and also the senior officials within the Department of Justice for being with us today. You could have been anywhere, but that you chose to do this at Howard University means a great deal to us, and most importantly, means a great deal to our students. I have the privilege of introducing the United States Attorney for the Northern District of California, Ismail Ramsey. I could tell you all about his great career, it's in the book, but what I will say is, in a sense, he's coming home. His father was our dean here for 6 years. And the fact of the matter is, a lot of the good that is happening here at Howard has to do with the work that his father did. And somewhere from a heavenly gaze, he must be smiling. Izzy, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, everyone, for coming to the first annual Charlotte E. Ray Lecture and White Collar Conference. As was noted, I am the newest U.S. attorney in the country, having taken the oath of office only 3 weeks ago. But when I was asked to come give the welcoming remarks for this lecture and conference, I was thrilled. As he mentioned, this place is indeed special to me. My father was dean here in the 1990s, and this is truly a merging of my two families, in a sense, my Justice Department family and my personal family. I'm just thrilled that the Justice Department has decided to have this conference here. I think the Justice Department and Howard Law School, though, are tied together in many ways over the years. Howard Law School was founded during the middle of the Reconstruction in 1869, and its purpose was to train and educate people to be lawyers to defend the rights of blacks in the country. And the Justice Department, interestingly enough, was founded the next year in 1870 with its principal purpose to defend the rights of blacks and secure voting rights during Reconstruction. And so at the very beginning of the birth of these two institutions, in that sense of their missions, they have been tied together. And throughout the history, the 150 years of both institutions, that has been a guiding principle. And indeed, the Attorney General Merrick Garland has repeatedly talked about that principled purpose to secure voting rights after the passages of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. And that thread of justice, which is cut through the department over that entire time, has also been the same thread that has cut through Howard Law throughout that entire time, all the way through the 30s when Charles Hamilton Houston was dean here. And that was at the same period where the Justice Department took on the role of prosecuting all crimes in the federal courts through the civil rights movement in the 60s to today. And it's fitting that this is the Charlotte E. Ray Lecture, again, celebrating the first African-American woman lawyer in the nation. And fittingly, the folks that we have here today, we are living in a historic time, at least as far as U.S. attorneys are concerned. This administration has more black women U.S. attorneys than at any other time in our nation. The Biden administration has had 9 different black women U.S. attorneys, 2 of whom we have here today who you'll hear from. But I think that thread and that history about what this institution means and what the Justice Department means is important. So I'm looking forward to hearing from all the panelists here today, as I know you are, and I'm thankful for everyone who's come. And with that, I will turn it over to William Dean, who's the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Izzy. It's my distinct honor and privilege to be able to introduce our dean, but I do wish to acknowledge several people. First, there's LaShawn Reeder, who's the administrative assistant to Dean Holly. Suffice it to say, there's no Charlotte E. Ray lecture without her. Is Miss Reeder here today? She's running around making it happen. And then there's Robert Wright of Student Services, and he works with Cynthia Amasebi and with Kayla Tolley. I know Kayla and Cynthia are here. Wave your hand so they can see you. In the back, and Cynthia's a... Cynthia is a graduate of the Howard Law School, and Cynthia and Kayla are both at Baker Botts. And as you'll see throughout the day, as our students come in and out, their presence is a result of the good work that they have done. I want to thank Lisa Miller, and I think Keith Edelman is here. I saw him earlier. And they worked very hard to plan this. You know, good things don't happen by accident. They're a result of intentional work. And certainly, last but not least, are my friends Steve Solo and Preston Pugh. Wave so we can see you guys. And they are the people with an original idea. And because of the generosity of the Assistant Attorney General and so many of you that are with us today, this is why we have this privilege. So let me just say a few things. John Mercer Langston, Richard Greener, Charles Hamilton Houston, James Nabrett, Spotswood, Robinson, Patricia Roberts Harris, Wiley Branton, Henry Ramsey, Alice Bullock, Patricia Worthy, Kurt Schmoke, Okima Dark. These deans of this great law school individually and collectively changed the course of history. But I came here this morning to tell you that our dean, my dean, Holly, has also made her mark. She's a graduate of Yale, I think a classmate of Miss Avery, and the Harvard Law School. Dean Holly has led the law school since 2014. She's about to become the first black woman to lead Mount Holyoke College, their 20th president. You should interrupt me and applaud that. She was a law clerk to Judge Carl Stewart of the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit. She's taught numerous courses, including legislation and regulation, inequality and education, civil procedure, administrative law, federal courts, and my favorite, the one that she started, leadership for lawyers. Her scholarship is focused on the governance of public schools, increasing access to higher education, and diversity in the legal profession. Well, our dean's timely. And time won't permit me to talk about the honors she's received with the board she served on, but would you give me 60 seconds to tell you about her accomplishments? You see that she created, working with others, she created the Office of Academic Success and Bar Preparation. We've seen improvement, significant the first time in 2-year ultimate bar passage rate. She's created a comprehensive law school strategic plan. She's expanded the legal legal writing faculty. She's expanded Howard Law clinics and externships. We've seen a significant increase in scholarly articles, and that's an investment in scholarship. She's established a second co-curricular law journal, the Howard Human and Civil Rights Law Review. She established a pre-law summer enrichment program for HBCU undergrads. She founded the VA JV program. She established the Earl and Anna Brody Distinguished Visiting Faculty Chair. She's created the Vernon E. Jordan Endowed Faculty Chair. If you parked as I did in our parking lot, you saw that big sign, Vernon E. Jordan Junior Library. That's based on a $1 million gift from the Aiken Gump Law Firm. We're remodeling and renaming this Judge Damon Keith Blue courtroom here. She's founded an alternative dispute resolution certificate program. Well, let's talk about a few other things. She founded, or during her time, we founded the Thurgood Marshall Civil Rights Center. It's hard to imagine, but there wasn't a real activity on this campus named for its most famous graduate, Thurgood Marshall. She obtained a $10 million grant to create the J.L. Green Public Interest Scholarship Program. She's improved annual fundraising by over 200%. For the last 2 years, Howard Law has raised $20 million a year. In her time, there's been a 25% increase in the number of students enrolling in the first year class, a 67% increase in applicants. Y'all should stop me and applaud. And last but not least, the Howard University School of Law has moved up 44 spots in the U.S. News and World Report. Not since Newt Rockney returned to South Bend has one person had an impact on a school that the dean has had. My hero in this spring of the year, Jackie Robinson, said, "A life is unimportant except in the impact it has on other lives." It's my genuine pleasure to present to you our dean, my dean, a woman who's made an inestimable impact on the lives of others, Dean Danielle Holly. Please join me.
Can't thank Ben enough for that introduction, but I have to say I was like sitting there blushing, embarrassed by hearing that. I have to thank you so much. Ben, as you can tell, is not just introducing me. He's a member of the Howard Law family. He is one of our most favorite adjunct faculty, but he also really established the environmental law program here at the law school. That's not something that many adjuncts can say that they did, is establish an entire program for their law school, and so we are just tremendously grateful for you, Professor Wilson, for being here with us. I want to welcome each and every one of you here on behalf of the students, faculty, staff, and alumni of Howard University School of Law. How many of you are visiting Howard University School of Law for the first time? Raise your hand. That is exactly why we wanted to do this. We wanted to welcome you to our campus, for you to meet our outstanding students. You'll see many of them begin to flow in just a few minutes. Classes are stopping at 12:30, and so you'll see many of them flow in just a minute. And we really wanted you to be able to experience the beauty of Howard University and what we do here. I have to welcome home Ismail Ramsey. It is wonderful to see him and to know the incredible work that his father, Dean Henry Ramsey, did on behalf of the law school. So today's event really grew out of a conversation with Ben and with his friends, Preston Pugh and Steve Solo, and together we discussed the notion of an event that would do three things. First, we thought it was important to address the important issues related to white-collar crime enforcement by the Department of Justice. We wanted to bring together some of the most important leaders in the Justice Department with Howard students to share with them the rewards, challenges, and responsibilities of becoming an attorney in the Justice Department. And finally, we wanted to undertake all of this in recognition of and in the name of a remarkable woman, Charlotte E. Ray. The Assistant Attorney General in charge of the Criminal Division, Kenneth A. Did I say that with the correct New Orleans accent? Okay. Will speak more about Ms. Ray in this inaugural address named for her, so I will only say this. Ever since I began my journey as dean of this law school, I've looked for more ways to see and recognize the remarkable achievements of Black women in the legal profession. As Professor Wilson just mentioned, currently about 70% of our students here at Howard University School of Law are women of color, particularly Black women. And Charlotte Ray was the first Black woman admitted to practice in the entire United States. We have consciously called this lecture the Charlotte E. Ray Lecture. Ms. Ray graduated from Howard University School of Law and was the first Black woman admitted to the bar of the District of Columbia and to the Supreme Court of the United States. In her name, we will hear from some of the leading Justice Department lawyers from some of the most important jurisdictions in America. And these are the most senior criminal enforcement officials of the Department of Justice, joined by the accomplished white-collar criminal defense attorneys. These remarkable men and women have reached some of the most powerful and meaningful positions that the legal system in this country provides. I am really excited to see all of our outstanding panelists. As Professor Wilson mentioned, I'm very excited to see Vanessa Avery, U.S. Attorney for the District of Connecticut. We went to college together. We've known each other since we were teenagers. It's incredible to see her many accomplishments and all that she's doing in her new role as U.S. Attorney for the District of Connecticut. Assistant Attorney General Polig will speak next. He was born and raised in New Orleans. I am a also a Gulf Coaster. I was raised in Houston, Texas. I see some other New Orleanians here in the audience who are raising their hands just now. We have so much pride in New Orleans, and we're excited for him to be here. He was valedictorian of his high school. He received his BA from Harvard University and his JD from Georgetown University. Following a clerkship in the Third Circuit, he was first an associate at Skadden and then an assistant United States attorney with the Southern District of New York. From there, he went back to New Orleans and headed the white-collar practice of renowned local firm and was then partner at Morgan Lewis. In 2013, President Barack Obama nominated Assistant Attorney General Polig to be the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of Louisiana. In addition to bringing high-profile cases, his term as U.S. Attorney was notable for his focus on civil rights and re-entry programs for former inmates. After serving as U.S. Attorney, he was the Chief Compliance Officer for Entergy Energy Company and then a partner again at the Morgan Lewis Law Firm. 2 years ago, almost to this day, President Biden nominated Mr. Polig to be the Assistant Attorney General for the Criminal Division, and he was sworn into that position in July of 2021. When approached about the idea for this conference, Assistant Attorney General Polig was immediately excited about the chance to speak to and engage with Howard University School of Law students. Careers in government have always been important here at Howard. You know some of our most famous graduates who have served in public interest roles, in public service roles like Thurgood Marshall and Letitia James, who's the current Attorney General for the state of New York. Together with his colleagues here today, we look forward to hearing from Assistant Attorney General Polig. I thank him for being here, and I thank all of the remarkable attorneys who will speak today. Your presence here today at Howard reflects your support of this law school and also the support of more attorneys of color joining this outstanding profession and joining the Justice Department. Please join me in welcoming Assistant Attorney General Polig to Howard University School of Law for the first ever Charlotte E. Ray Lecture.
Thank you, Dean, and thank you to Izzy and to Ben for your opening remarks. Let me just begin by saying, for those of you who are celebrants of the Christian faith, 2 days ago we celebrated Resurrection Sunday. Today is indeed a day that the Lord has made, because let me just tell you, you have given up hours of your time, to be amongst your colleagues from the Department of Justice, from private industry, from private practice, to be on the campus of Howard University Law School, where we should have been a long time ago. You are all here today, and I expect that this opportunity will help replenish your spirit and uplift your souls today. Thank you all for being here. Give yourselves a round of applause for being with us today. Most importantly, we are assembled shoulder to shoulder to celebrate and honor and lift up the students of this great university. And I look forward to meeting with as many of them as possible over the next few hours and beyond. You heard from several people earlier, this event is not one that happens in isolation. Thank you so much to our dean for her esteemed and inspired leadership. Thank you to members of my team. You heard them mentioned earlier, my DAG, Lisa Miller, my senior counsel, Keith Edelman, Steve Solo, Preston Pugh, Ben Wilson, of course, and many others who contributed to this event where we all gather here today. I'm truly humbled to deliver the first, but certainly not the last, Charlotte E. Ray lecture this afternoon. It is a privilege to be able to speak about this very important figure in the history of our profession and in the history of our country. As you have heard, Ms. Ray was the very first Black woman in the United States to graduate from law school, the first Black woman to be admitted to the DC in the Supreme Court bar. She is also one of this law school's most esteemed alums. There is not much known about her life. But what we do know is this. She was, in every way, a trailblazer. She was born in 1850 in New York. Her father, like our dear colleague from the Eastern District of New York, U.S. Attorney Breon Peace, her father was a reverend, the Reverend Charles Bennett Ray, who was a well-known abolitionist, minister, journalist, conductor on the Underground Railroad. He also served as the editor of the Colored American and abolitionist newspaper. And as former Howard Law School professor J. Clay Smith Jr. has written, Reverend Ray instilled the importance of education into all of his children. In fact, all of his children who survived to adulthood were college graduates, an unheard of accomplishment. Charlotte Ray enrolled at the Institution for the Education of Colored Youth here in Washington and then became a teacher at Howard University, but she yearned for more. She longed for more education, she longed for more development, so she began taking classes here at the law school in the evenings and graduated in 1872, given the incredible obstacles that she faced at the time. Some have suggested that to even gain access to the DC bar, she had to apply using just her initials, C.E. Ray, in order to hide the fact that she was a woman. Think about the accomplishments. When Ms. Ray was 7 years old, the Supreme Court of this country decided Dred Scott, holding that African Americans could never be citizens under our Constitution. The highest court in this land, just a few miles from where we gather here this afternoon, wrote those cruel, reprehensible words that African Americans were, quote, beings of an inferior order and altogether unfit to associate with the white race, unquote. Just 10 years before Ms. Ray graduated from law school, slavery was legal right here in this nation's capital. The Civil War had ended just 7 years before she graduated. And although she graduated shortly after the passage of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments, institutional prejudices persisted. Indeed, the year after Ms. Ray was admitted to the bar here in the District of Columbia, the Supreme Court decided Bradwell v. Illinois and held that the state could lawfully prevent women of all races from becoming licensed attorneys. Justice Joseph Bradley even went so far as to write that the family institution is repugnant to the idea of a woman adopting a distinct and independent career from that of her husband. Like many of the women in your own lives, my mother, my wife, and my 2 proud daughters would all disagree. Consider the weight and the magnitude of these biases, which span society and were woven into the law and into our court system. The structural, foundational, institutional racism and sexism that restrained so many for the privilege of a few. And yet, Miss Ray pressed on. She opened her own law practice here in Washington, where, according to Professor Smith, she established a reputation for being one of the best lawyers in the areas of corporations law. She even presented a well-regarded paper on chancery law at her commencement ceremony. It all comes full circle for us, folks. And that is why I am excited for this conference, where we will be hearing from esteemed panelists to discuss current issues in corporate and white-collar law. To build her new business, Ms. Ray placed an advertisement in the New National Era, Frederick Douglass's newspaper, but unfortunately the discrimination that she encountered as a woman, as an African-American, was too powerful, and despite her accomplishments, Ms. Ray could not sustain her own practice. In the mold of her 2 sisters, she moved back to New York and became a teacher in the Brooklyn public school system, where she continued to advocate in her life, including advocating for the women's suffrage movement until her death in 1911. That is what we call a trailblazer. Uncharted territories. Miss Ray forged a path forward, a path that had never been walked before. But as Miss Ray's career shows, those who blaze a trail cannot always walk it on their own. These figures must create the path, but it is up to each and every one of us, our support systems, our families, to come forward, to continue that path forward and onward, and to broaden it so that others may access it more easily. And many have done so. From Mary Ann Shadd Carey, another Howard alum of that era, to Jane Bolin, the first female Black judge, to Eunice Carter, one of the first Black female prosecutors who helped take down Lucky Luciano, to Justice and Judge Constance Baker Motley of the Southern District of New York, and so many others. Like many of you assembled here, I owe this path, one of service, one steeped in white-collar matters, one where I was often the first or the only in a particular room, to Miss Ray and to countless others who have come before all of us. That work is not done. No, although Dred Scott, as we all know, is no longer a good law, structural inequities persist. The effects of centuries of slavery continue to reverberate throughout our society. And for as many individual success stories you can name, and you will hear from many of them today, there are countless others who were never able to break through the barriers of our society. So when we talk about and honor trailblazers, we must recognize that there is more to be done. No, a trailblazer may create that path, but we must walk it. And we must expand it for those who come next. No, make no mistake. The path that Ms. Ray forged is far broader than simply being the first Black woman attorney in this country. Through her pursuits, she did not just earn a license to earn a living. She did far more with her talents. She used her gifts to effect positive change in her community in a time of great hostility in our world. I will lift up one particular example of her advocacy. Her representation of a battered wife in the case of Gadley v. Gadley. Ms. Ray's client was an illiterate Black woman who was seeking a divorce against her husband, who had viciously attacked her. In Ms. Ray's pleading for her client, this is one of the few known writings of Ms. Ray that have survived. She described how when her client was laying on the floor, the husband took an axe and ripped up the floor planks to try and cause that woman to fall to the floor below, all while threatening to break her neck. Recall again the laws of this era. Women were afforded few, if any, rights. Married women were often considered their husband's property. But Charlotte Ray never relented on behalf of her client and pursued that case in the DC Supreme Court. And when her own practice could not earn enough business to survive due to the discrimination that she faced, Ms. Ray continued to effect change. She taught others. She fought for others, continuing to press forward for greater good in our world. I call on all of us in this room to do the same. No matter your particular role, attorneys have a special, a privileged place in our society. Through words on a page, we can lift up our communities. With our voices, we can advocate for those who cannot speak. We can zealously defend clients who need our representation. We can help companies succeed in promoting a compliance of culture. We can do what Howard Law Professor Homer LaRue has done in creating the Ray Corollary Initiative. This detailed plan, named again after Charlotte E. Ray, is designed to increase the selection of people of color to serve as arbitrators and mediators. There is more to be done around this school, around this community, in this country, in this world. And there are people who are pleading for our help. Those who are stuck in cycles of poverty, those who are without access to basic needs like shelter and food, those who have been victimized over and over again by crime in our world. So look to the path blazed by Charlotte Ray. See her perseverance. Embrace her determination. Feel her passion for justice. It is our duty, no, our honor, to follow and broaden that path towards justice for us all. Thank you all for being here today. It's my great privilege to move forward with our agenda for today, and let me tell you, part of what is truly inspired about today's event is just being able to get everybody scheduled to align to be here for these panels today. You are going to hear from some esteemed voices, pillars of our practice, both inside and outside of the Department of Justice. Our very first panel, you will hear from the leaders of several of our U.S. attorneys' offices around our country. I call forward Breon Peace, Vanessa Avery, Damian Williams, and Stephanie Hines. we will get to hear from a few of these folks. I'm going to take a few minutes to just brag on each one of them for a little bit. I will start with Vanessa. Vanessa has been the U.S. Attorney for the District of Connecticut since May of 2022. Prior to her appointment as U.S. Attorney, she served as the Associate Attorney General and Chief of the Division of Enforcement and Public Protection at the Connecticut Office of the Attorney General. She has served on the Connecticut Attorney General's Litigation Management Committee, the Connecticut Bar Association Policing Task Force, and led the COVID-19 Fraud Task Force. From 2014 to 2019, she served as an Assistant U.S. Attorney in the Civil Division in Connecticut. She has been an attorney in private practice as well from 2006 to 2014 at McCarter and English. She has also been a trial attorney in the Commercial Litigation Branch of the Department's Civil Division here in Washington, D.C. She is a graduate of Yale University and Georgetown Law School here in Washington. Welcome, our U.S. Attorney from Connecticut, Vanessa Avery. Stephanie Himes has had a truly remarkable career in public service that has spanned over 28 years with the Department of Justice, where she currently serves as the first Assistant U.S. Attorney, or FAUSA, for Ismail Ramsey, our U.S. Attorney from the Northern District of California. Stephanie served as the acting U.S. Attorney for the district for over 2 years, from March of 2021 to March of 2023. Prior to her appointment, she served in that same office as FAUSA, as a Deputy U.S. Attorney, as Deputy Chief of the Criminal Division, Chief of the Asset Forfeiture Section. What else? A line AUSA for a number of years. She has served a detail as the Acting Deputy Director for the Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, or OCDEF, here at Main Justice in Washington. And prior to her time in the department, she also served as the Deputy City Attorney in the San Francisco City Attorney's Office, as well as a stint in private practice. She is a proud graduate of UC Berkeley and UC Hastings College of Law. Welcome, Stephanie Himes. Breon Peace, like myself, a proud Kappa man. Breon has been the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of New York since October of 2021. He previously served as an Assistant U.S. Attorney in that same office. Prior to his confirmation as U.S. Attorney, Breon was a partner at the international law firm Cleary Gottlieb, where he was a member of the firm's white-collar defense and investigations groups. He joined Cleary in 1996 and rejoined it in 2003 after clerking and as his time as a USA. In 2007, U.S. Attorney Peace made history by becoming the first African-American man to be elected partner in his law firm. At Cleary, he represented clients in white-collar criminal matters and other government enforcement litigation. In addition, in 2012, Breon was appointed by a judge in the Eastern District to serve as a special master in a high-profile case brought against the New York City Fire Department, alleging discrimination on the basis of race and national origin in hiring Black and Hispanic firefighters. Breon received his JD from NYU School of Law and, like Stephanie, went to college at UC Berkeley. Welcome, our U.S. Attorney from the Eastern District of New York, Breon Peace. Finally, we are joined by Damian Williams, who serves as the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York since October of 2021. Damian supervises over 450 lawyers, special agents, paralegals, and other support staff in the district where I cut my teeth as an AUSA. Prior to his confirmation as U.S. Attorney, Damian served as Chief of SDNY's Securities and Commodities Fraud Task Force. Damian also served as a law clerk to then Circuit Court Judge and now Attorney General Merrick Garland, as well as Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens. He received his undergraduate degree from Harvard, a degree in international relations from the University of Cambridge, and his law degree from Yale Law School. He also serves as chair of the Attorney General's Advisory Committee, and also is the first African American to serve as U.S. Attorney for the Sovereign District, Southern District of New York. Welcome our U.S. Attorney from Vanessa Avery. Let me say their service to the department extends far beyond their own districts. As I mentioned, Damian serves as the chair of our very critical Attorney General's Advisory Committee, but Breon also serves in a significant role as part of that committee's work. He serves as chair of the AGAC's subcommittee on white-collar fraud. Vanessa is a member of the AGAC's Corporate Criminal Enforcement Policy Working Group, and Stephanie was a member of that working group as well during her time as U.S. Attorney. I look forward to today's confirmation, and if you don't mind, I'm going to take a seat to get comfortable. My first question to each of you, and I'll begin with you, Brother Peace. Can you tell me about a formative event that led you to become the public servant that you are today?
Well, first of all, I just want to say I'm honored to be here. Can you hear me? There we go. Green. Okay. Sorry about that. No, I just want to say I'm honored to be here with you today during this amazing event here at Howard University School of Law. Thank you for having me. There's so many events, Kenneth, that I could point to. I can think in terms of formative events. One, Kenneth mentioned my father was a pastor of a church, and my mother was his partner in ministry. And I realize now, as I sit here in this position, how much of an impact their work had on me and my perspectives on what I wanted to do and needed to do to serve the community. So I remember many instances in which my father would just go to visit someone who was sick, or someone would come knocking on our door at 11 p.m. or midnight, and my father would take time to counsel them, pray with them. So ingrained in me was, you must do something to help people in your community. And so as I thought about law and my career, I always thought, I want to be doing something to help people. So whether it's service in government as a prosecutor, whether it was at my law firm doing pro bono work in criminal justice areas, immigration, civil rights, and now back in government, my goal has always been to do what I can to take what God has given me to try to have an impact, a positive impact on the community I live in and serve. So at this point now, I'm in a great position to do that. Eastern District of New York has over 8 million people. We have 3 of the 5 boroughs. We have all of Long Island. There's a lot of issues to address. And I am in a position now to deploy resources to make sure that we are doing all we can to keep the community safe, but also to try to improve the lives of the people in our community. And that has been such a fulfilling opportunity that I am really, really enjoying at this point.
Thank you. Stephanie, same question to you. You had an accomplished career in the department. Tell us a little bit about an event or what has led you, inspired you to be in the role that you are as a public servant.
Thank you. I too would like to, first of all, thank everyone for the invitation to be here. Thank you, Dean. Thank you, Ben, and Lisa Miller for asking me to be a part of this event. I am honored and privileged to be here. With respect to public service, I ingrained in my family, I am from Jamaica. I am born in Jamaica, my parents in Jamaica. And from an early age, public service was something that my family I watched them do various different things in order in the work of service. My mother was a nurse. My paternal and maternal grandparents were in the education field. And so for me, those were examples of people that I saw giving back to others in the community in which they lived. Shortly after I was born, my folks moved to New York. And then I went back after a few years back to Jamaica and boarded away at school. My folks sacrificed for all of our families, for our family in order to do this. I did not come to the law from being around it. I didn't know many lawyers when I was younger. I actually came into the law by accident in some respect. I thought that I was going to be working on Wall Street someday. When I was in college, I was a finance and marketing major. I saw myself going and working on Wall Street. When those jobs didn't come around right away, I went back to law school to enhance my business career. When I was in law school, it was in my first year, in my first summer, my legal writing instructor pointed me to the U.S. Attorney's Office as an opportunity to get some experience. And from that opportunity, I saw what lawyers for the Department of Justice did. And I thought to myself, I wanted to get back there, and I wanted to do that. In addition to that, my third year in law school, I externed for Felton Henderson, who was the first African-American lawyer for the Department of Justice working in the Civil Rights Division. He helped shape me and my thoughts about what I wanted to do. I reconfirmed that I definitely wanted to come back and work for the Department of Justice. So those were some of the formative things that allowed me and have guided me for over 28 years to remain with the department and to serve in this manner.
Thank you. Vanessa, your thoughts, I believe, like Ms. Ray, you are blazing a trail there in Connecticut. I believe you are the first African-American female to serve as head of your office as well.
I am, that is correct.
Tell us a little bit about what has inspired you to serve in your role.
Sure. And I'm not going to ask for a show of hands as to how many people have been to Connecticut, because I might be disappointed. Okay, more than a few. Wonderful. I come from the small state with a big heart. We bleed blue, for those who follow the NCAA tournament. National champions 5 times. Who's counting? The women will be back next year. It is just truly an honor to be here, as everyone else has said, to be on this panel and to serve in this role at a time in our history right now where there's just such a historic energy in the air. To be able to form relationships with the folks on this panel right here and our colleagues across the country has just been a phenomenal experience. I grew up in New Haven, and as you heard, I attended Yale University with your dean back when we were young people, teenagers on campus, but I grew up far from the campus in the inner city back during the 80s and early 90s, during the height of the crack epidemic and the so-called war on drugs. It was also the peak of gun violence in New Haven, and I think around the country back then in the early 90s. I was in high school at that time. And I remember that there was hardly a week that went by where someone my age, or maybe slightly older, early 20s, wasn't shot and killed. To this day, I don't know how many of the young men I went to school with are still living, because there were so many people we lost during that period. And so for me, understanding the trauma of growing up in a community like that, understanding what it means to live in a community where law enforcement is feared, law enforcement is despised, where there's so much tension, was something that drew me to think about how I could be effective in making a difference. I had been introduced to the Justice Department early in my career, and I've also lived in other communities outside of the one I grew up in, so obviously I know that law enforcement can also do a lot of good, that they can be a trusted partner in helping to maintain the health and safety of the community. So that is why I was drawn to the work that I was drawn to. I feel like this is exactly where I'm supposed to be right now, doing exactly what I'm supposed to do. When I was a young person, I didn't think about becoming an attorney. I was an extremely shy child. I love to talk now, give me a mic and I can. But back then I didn't really think about it as a career for myself. And it wasn't until my junior year of college I was thinking about teaching. Still consider myself a teacher now, and I think we all are in our own ways. But I was having a conversation with my mother about graduating from college and becoming a teacher. And she said, what about law school? And my mother came from very humble beginnings. Her parents were sharecroppers in rural South Carolina. She grew up in a house with no indoor plumbing. And she was wise beyond her years and had this way of encouraging me to do things that I hadn't really imagined, but she wouldn't push me to do it. She would just ask me to consider it. So she asked the question, what about law school? And I said, what's wrong with teaching? And her response was, I didn't say there was anything wrong with teaching, but what about law school? And so, of course, I knew better than to continue to battle back and forth with her. So I devised a plan to ask a few of my professors what they thought about this crazy idea my mother had of me continuing on to do 3 more years of school. And everyone to a person said that a law degree is the best degree you could get. It's the best form of education, whether you want to teach and take that JD to use it for teaching or go into any other field or practice law. And so I went back to my mother and I said, you know, I think I'm going to try this law school thing, but you don't just sign up to go to law school. I have to pass this exam called the LSAT. And we didn't have money for that. So I found some free materials and had my roommate proctor me. And I took the LSAT, did well enough to apply to some law schools. And the rest is history. Here I am. Mom was right. I went to law school. I loved it. I've loved everything about moot court and mock trials and anything litigation related. I consider myself a generalist, so I'm sure we'll get into this later, but I came to this area that we're here to talk about today by a little bit of a winding path. But that's why I'm here. I feel like there are certain things, certain talents, and certain passions we all have. And if you're able to find that thing that drives you and to use it in a career and get paid for it and make a living doing it, while also having tremendous impact, then you should do it. And so I hope that many of you sitting in the audience who, like me, would not have considered working for the Department of Justice back when I was a young person will consider it after hearing from all of us today. Thank you.
Brother Williams, same question. Love to hear about what has inspired you to serve your esteemed career in public service.
Well, so first of all, I just want to start out by saying this feels like a homecoming. This is my first time here at Howard Law, but my mother went to Howard, my father went to Howard, my sister went to Howard, my uncles went to Howard, my cousins went to Howard. So I didn't actually know that there was another school until I was old enough to do some research, but I thought that was what college was Howard. So it's good to be home, number one. And number two, I think it's amazing the commonality across this table here because, Stephanie, I didn't know you were Jamaican. My family is Jamaican too. And, you know, when I think about what inspired me to a life of service, it really starts with the fact that my family came here from Jamaica. And by all kind of American standards, my family grew up very poor. And my mom had no indoor plumbing. She bathed in the river behind her house. And that's just what people did because that's how we lived in Jamaica. And so when, as a kid, I would measure the distance between where my family was in Jamaica and where we were here in the US, that distance always felt incredibly wide. And I was too young to understand, why that was, right? But I was fascinated by it, and one of the things that it made me feel was a sense of debt to the country. Not because America gave us everything. I mean, it was a struggle, obviously. It's been a struggle. That's part of the story. But in no other country was that distance in such a short amount of time possible to travel. And so before I had the word for patriotism, I felt it. Before I had the word for duty, I felt it. I felt the duty to give back in some way, shape, or form, and to show the country that they made a good decision in making us Americans, and that we, my family, made a good decision in coming here in the first place. And so I've always wanted to be in public service in some way, shape, or form. I had no idea what it looked like. We didn't have lawyers in my family. But life has its way of getting you to where you need to be. And over the course of my life, not only in moments of triumph, but also tragedy, those moments have led me to where I am today. I wouldn't have found the Southern District of New York in the first place if I hadn't lost my sister right before I started law school. You know, that's how I found the Department of Justice, because I had blown all the internship deadlines and I was struggling in school. And the school I went to, Yale Law School, paired me with a 2L who was kind of like my grief buddy. And she helped me get a job, an internship in SDNY, because she knew them and thought that they would take me in, and that's exactly what happened. And that's how I found the Department of Justice. So even though, Kenneth, when you read our bios, and it sounds like we've kind of gone from thing to thing, right? Jumping from mountaintop to mountaintop, you actually need to trace the valleys too, because that's part of the journey. And that's how I got to the department ultimately. And that's how I've been able to live out this dream that I've had since I was a little kid, to give back to the country that's given us so much.
Got some important subject matter to turn to eventually, but I do want to have you all reflect a little bit on a couple of additional topics that your comments have already touched on, the role of mentors in your lives. But I also had the great occasion of attending the investitures for both you, Breon, and Damian, events that were held in the community in places of some real significance for you. Vanessa, you've already touched upon some of the challenges that we face in the Department of Justice in maintaining connectivity with the community that we serve. I'd love to hear from you all to also reflect upon how you are engaging with the community to overcome and strengthen those relationships with the communities you serve. I'll start with Damian. How about you?
Well, look, my view is that part of it is just showing up. I think that when I took over as U.S. Attorney in the Southern District, there was this saying, I don't know where it came from, but people would say the eagle doesn't fly. The eagle doesn't fly. And I think that was to indicate that people would come to us, we wouldn't go to them. And when I was sworn in, the first thing that I wanted to make sure people knew was that this eagle flies, right? We have to go to where the people are. We need to show our work. We need to show why it matters. We're in the customer service business too, like it or not. People can't just assume within the department that the community will appreciate the work that we do for them every single day if we're not out there talking to them about why it matters, why consumer protection and environmental protection and civil rights enforcement and all the different forms of enforcement work that we do. It's not just criminal enforcement, right? Civil enforcement is law enforcement too, and we need to tell that story and be proud of it, because that's important work that connects up with people's lived existence. And so I want to make sure that I'm telling that story. So I measure my success, and I'm holding myself accountable by understanding and looking at my schedule. How much time am I spending outside of my building? It's all the work that we do inside of SCNY is very important. I get that. But there are a lot of smart lawyers who can do it, right? My job is to do all the other stuff and to be outside the building. So that's part of my thesis about reconnecting with the community, just showing up.
Yeah, and just continuing on that theme, of course, that's why we're all here today, right? Community engagement is the legacy that I want to leave with the office in the same way that Damian's talking about it. One of the senior positions that I created when I started last year was a director of community engagement, who's a member of my senior team, reports to my deputy, sits in on all the meetings and governs all of the strategy overall for the office. Because I'm going to be out in the community, and like Damian and Breon, I also had my investiture held in the community at my high school. I grew up in New Haven, as I mentioned, and that's where our home office is headquartered. And so it was important to me to bring the folks from my office, from all the various parts of my legal career and the judiciary into my high school so that we could show that full circle moment in real time. It's also important for us to understand that community engagement should be critical to the work we're doing. People should understand that history of civil rights that was central to the founding of the Justice Department. They should understand it and see it. There are some initiatives that I'm sure, I hope that some of you have heard of, like our United Against Hate initiative, which is a nationwide initiative where we're rolling out into the community to educate sectors where people may feel marginalized, whether it's people of color, whether it's LGBTQ+, whether it's the immigrant community. People should understand what our role is, both on the civil side and the criminal side, as Damian said. And so I have challenged my team to be out there and be visible in the schools, including middle schools and high schools, but in the schools, in the community as much as I am, and to make it integral, make it relatable to the types of cases that they're working on. So, critical.
Thank you. I concur with all of that. The importance of having community engagement is to build the trust with the community that we need to have in order to fulfill our roles as protecting the communities that we serve. So it is very important for us to get out there and engage with all different groups on all different levels. And Izzy and I have actually talked about this more in our office. We want to get more of our AUSAs, our assistant U.S. attorneys, out there and engaged in the community, doing quite a bit of stuff. One of the programs that I started in our office 2 years ago when I became acting was I tapped line assistants, line AUSAs. We serve 15 counties in our district, and I tapped 15 different assistant U.S. attorneys to lead in each one of those counties to be community liaisons, not only with the various different groups and organizations, but with our law enforcement partners there, because we need to be visible, we needed to be there, we needed to hear what was going on in order for us to really gain the trust and build those relationships in order that we can protect them. So absolutely, community engagement, I think, is key one in terms of us really being able to serve and protect the public that we serve.
I agree with all of that, and I will say one of the reasons that I wanted to return to the department, because I recognize that there are many challenges that the country was facing, our district was facing, but there was also a real crisis of confidence in the criminal justice system and in law enforcement. And I thought that there was room for us to improve upon that. And one of the things that we need to do to improve upon that is engage with the community, as my colleague said. One of the first things that I did as U.S. Attorney was convene a community engagement team in my office made up of AUSAs and our professional staff to organize our efforts to get out into the community for a few reasons. One is we need to hear from the community. We need to understand what's going on, what issues we need to address because we work for them. But we also need to educate the community. I've been surprised at how little people know about what we at the U.S. Attorney's Office does on a day-to-day basis for the community. So part of it is getting out to educate and also to listen. And we have to build trust, as Stephanie said, that's key. We rely on the community to let us know when things are going wrong. There are witnesses, there are victims, they are members of the community that rely on us on a day-to-day basis. One of the things that was interesting and I learned, and this was a couple months after I joined, which I thought was interesting. We have in the Eastern District many cases that involve diverse communities, immigrant communities, people who speak different languages, they're not native English speakers. I realized that we communicated as Eastern District solely in English. And I was surprised, but I thought that was an opportunity, so we started translating our materials into the various languages spoken in our district. Because really, when you think about it, you want to communicate with the community. You can't say, if you don't speak English, then you're just not going to learn about what we're doing. And the reaction to that from the community has been amazing. Community leaders have said, now we can really understand what you're doing and feel like you actually care about us learning about the work that you do. So those are examples of community engagement that go beyond showing up, but also making sure that we are speaking to people on their terms and they can understand what we're doing.
I love that, Breon. We very recently, the FCPA unit has translated its own guidance into Spanish, actually, for the exact same reason, literally reaching out to the community, both domestically and internationally, being able to connect with people by literally speaking their own language. Breon, you talked a little bit about educating, overcoming the obstacles of educating the public about what we do. Let's talk a little bit about white-collar crime in districts that you have all led or currently lead in both civil and criminal prosecutorial efforts. I would wonder, why is white-collar crime a priority for you in your office? And in particular, is there a particular type of crime, criminality, that you are seeing in your district that is a focus? Stephanie, I'll start with you.
In the Northern District, we have Silicon Valley. Silicon Valley, we are high-tech, lots of public companies, lots of startups. We have semiconductor research and development firms. We are seeing this time and time again in terms of what we're focusing on. The Northern District, however, is fairly diverse. Not only do we have those industries there, we certainly also have urban issues, urban crime that we're focused on. Fentanyl is an issue with respect to us. So we have a lot of diverse issues, not unlike many of my colleagues here on the panel, but for us in the tech sector in Silicon Valley, we are seeing quite a bit of securities fraud and other related, a lot of crypto-related crimes, money laundering, which is one of my specialties for many years here in the office. And so we have quite a diverse view of things that we're seeing in our district. So that is our area of focus, and that is something that is a huge priority for us in our district.
Excellent. Shout out to MLARS there. Vanessa, I'd love to hear about your priorities. Why is white-collar enforcement important in your district?
So our white-collar priorities are very similar, and I will start with that, and then I'll tell you why it's important, which I think probably applies to all of us. But our white-collar areas vary and range from anything from securities fraud and international market manipulation schemes and things of that nature, to healthcare fraud, to COVID-19 fraud, to elder fraud, cybercrime, which is everywhere, not just in the white-collar space, and then public corruption. All of those things are areas of priority for us. I mean, what we look for are what are the cases that are going to be most impactful in this space, particularly within our jurisdiction, and that's where we try and devote the resources. You may have in an elder fraud case a situation where the dollar amount is vastly smaller than what you would see in an international fraud case, but the impact on someone who's lost their life savings, or a number of people in a particular community who've lost their life savings through some crypto fraud scheme or something along that lines, can be tremendous. And so we try and pursue those cases, especially if we think we are the only place in the legal law enforcement field that's going to pursue those charges. So that's what we're saying. It's important that we do this work so that people understand that we want corporations and we want individuals to respect the law, to uphold the law. Corporate responsibility is vitally important to the running of our communities. We need good corporate citizens. So many good reasons. When corporations do things right, we all benefit. And when they do things wrong, innocent people get harmed in so many different ways. So that's.
Damian, even before getting in this, your current position, you served as head of the Securities Fraud Task Force in the office. So your career has oftentimes been at the center of this work. Tell us a little bit about why this continues to be a priority for you.
So it continues to be a priority in part because, as you mentioned, Ken, I mean, this is kind of my wheelhouse. I grew up in that space. I will admit, though, that I've often struggled with the label white-collar crime, right? Because even the label itself suggests that there is a white-collar track and a blue-collar track, and that our justice system doesn't necessarily have the same set of rules, and definitely doesn't necessarily approach enforcement of white-collar crime with the same vigor as blue-collar crime, so to speak. And so one of the reasons why I've always leaned in on white-collar enforcement, so to speak, is to change the perception that there's a different set of rules or a system of justice, and that there aren't consequences for bad behavior when it comes to people who are committing the types of frauds that we sometimes see out there. So that's always going to be a priority. Now, within the Southern District of New York, one of the things that I've been focused on is trying to collapse the distance between misconduct and consequence. Sometimes I think the perception of unfairness or two different systems of justice can persist and really grow when some of the white-collar investigations that we engage in just kind of take too long and accomplish too little in terms of deterrence. And so I'm trying to reduce that space so that people can see that the Justice Department is taking action and swift action to address bad conduct, and also to then deter other people from even thinking about getting into that kind of misconduct in the first place. So that's been a really big priority of mine, is trying to really push people to be more aggressive, more efficient, thoughtful in how they're organizing their investigations, pushing the defense bar to be more responsive in our investigations as well, and just move with a sense of urgency. We don't have any time to waste, period. And so everyone should act accordingly. That's my view. And so that's what I've been trying to push within my office since I've been U.S. Attorney.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think one of the things, having been on both sides as a defense lawyer and now back in government, I do think it's important for us as prosecutors to prosecute, investigate, deal with what we call white-collar crime or corporate crime, hold people accountable. There are not two different systems of justice for rich, for poor, for big, small. We need to hold everyone accountable. I will say, though, one of the things that I think we've all worked on as part of the department initiatives is having a bit more transparency to companies and the defense bar about what our expectations are, what will happen if you take certain steps, you self-disclose, you cooperate, you remediate, you have an effective compliance program, and then giving concrete benefits, because I do understand the tension for the defense bar and companies to say, if I do all the things the government wants, what's going to happen? And as a defense attorney, I often had the answer, it depends, we will see, let's hope for the best. So one of the things we've been doing in the department, and all of us on this panel have worked on the U.S. Attorney's Office's initiatives in coming up with policies that are transparent and provide concrete benefits. So I think that's another focus of ours. The one other thing I want to say, and I think we all kind of feel this way, I think we all in our offices have big cases, ones that are followed by the media, ones that get a lot of attention, whether it's in Foreign Corrupt Practices Act cases, securities fraud, et cetera. Those cases are great. They have significant deterrent effect. We have to do them. But one of the things that I have focused on as U.S. Attorney and told my team is I want them to focus on crimes in this space that affect the most vulnerable victims in our communities. And that has been important. We see a lot of affinity-based frauds where people are leveraging relationships in ethnic, religious, and cultural communities to take advantage of and abuse trust of people in those communities. And they are, draining people out of retirement funds, life savings, college savings. And so one of the things we focus on, we say they're not the biggest frauds in our district. They're not necessarily going to get coverage in the Wall Street Journal or New York Times, but the impact of bringing those cases and working hard to recover the money that was stolen from people in our district is significant. So in addition to the priorities that my colleagues have mentioned, which we do all of that, I like to joke, and Damian, don't get mad, but I say Brooklyn is the center of the universe. And Charlotte Ray obviously lived in Brooklyn, so that's but
I was born in Brooklyn, so I
know. So we have all types of crime, but I don't want us to just just focus on the biggest cases that are going to get the most attention. We have a duty to serve the people in our community, and that may mean doing cases that are going to affect different communities that no one is necessarily paying attention to, but the community knows, and the community is paying attention. And that's what we're here to do, to make their lives better.
You have the opportunity to address a number of esteemed members of the private bar right now, who we see representing clients in some of the very big cases that you work on, Breon, and frankly that we have partnered with each of you in your districts on. I'd love to hear you share with that audience. What are you prioritizing when you're crafting resolutions in some of these big cases? What are the important considerations that you have as the chief law enforcement officer as you're resolving a corporate matter that's sitting in front of you? Yeah, go ahead.
So I'll start. I think all our colleagues in the defense bar know, obviously, we have to assess the principles of prosecution of business organizations in assessing any resolution with corporations. But some of the things to highlight that we focus on all of them, but just to highlight a few. Now, obviously, the nature and seriousness of the crime, and in particular, impact on victims. That is very important for us in assessing what the right resolution will be. Steps taken by the company in response to the misconduct. So, for example, did you self-report? Did you do it in a timely fashion? Are you cooperating? Are you really cooperating? I have a benefit of being on both sides, so I kind of know what cooperation looks like and what's real cooperation versus cooperation in name only. We are also looking at the impact on the community, how best to resolve a case so it has the public interest well protected. The other thing to mention is collateral consequences. I am sensitive to the fact that resolutions have consequences, and so I'm always very interested to hear substantive presentations from the defense bar on what a particular form of resolution will do. And again, having been on both sides, it's helpful because I can assess what consequences are as significant as others may be. And then I think the remediation, I think, is important. What did you do after you figured out there was a problem? What steps did you take? Did you discipline? Did you change policies, procedures, internal controls? And did you train employees? All those things that we speak about in the department are all factors, among others, that I consider in coming up with the right corporate resolution. Now, I will say the obvious, which is, at least I speak for me, and I think my colleagues will agree, it's not about getting the highest criminal penalty. What's the highest number? We got to go a bit higher. It's not about that. It's not about the headlines. It's about fashioning the right result to deter conduct, to punish appropriately, to protect victims, and to protect the public interest. So those are some of the factors I think.
Excellent. Vanessa.
Yeah.
I would concur with everything that Breon just said, and a couple additional points. I think on the remediation side is certainly to ensure that the corporate culture is changing, to see that is this something that is a persistent issue with a corporate entity, or is it, are there really guardrails in place or really change in culture that is going to continue with respect to this? That is something that's important in trying to fashion an appropriate remedy for change. Who's involved? We talked about whether or not there's certain aggregating factors that may be involved in sort of looking at corporate resolutions. Is it senior executives, current? What again, on the remediation side, what have you done to address those issues? I do think in terms of, as the department as well as the U.S. Attorney's Office have come out with our voluntary self-disclosure policies that, again, how voluntary is it? Were you coming forward, were you letting us know in a timely fashion so that we would be able to address sort of the issues and concerns with respect to that. But those are, again, among the additional factors that we look at in ensuring, again, the overall goal is to ensure that we are protecting the public in going forward. In each of our jurisdictions where we have major corporations and businesses that are engaging in, as Vanessa talked about, securing the life savings of our constituents of the community that are engaged in really critical research and development programs or stuff. We want to deter any other conduct from various different industries, and we want to ensure that we have communicated really the consequences of not addressing those systemic problems that may be occurring in these corporations. So those are just additional factors.
I think Breon and Stephanie covered most of what I would have said. So I'll just add that I think it's clear that we want to see businesses succeed. We want businesses to succeed because that benefits all of us. It benefits the residents in our jurisdictions. And so our goal is not to put anybody out of business. Our goal is to make sure that we're upholding the rule of law, that we're holding businesses accountable. But we want to see you as partners with our nonprofit sectors and with our law enforcement sectors and our regulatory agencies, and making sure that we are doing things that are beneficial in our jurisdictions. And that's really the end game here. So the voluntary self-disclosure policy that we rolled out recently is something that we hope will incentivize you to come to us and have discussions as things occur, that you will look for things and build out strong compliance programs and self-remediate, and just talk to us early and often. I think that's the message we want to leave.
I'll add just one thing as a message to defense counsel. You know, one of the things that we see from time to time when we're trying to fashion a resolution, defense counsel may come in and say, well, if you charge our client, if you charge this corporation, when it comes to collateral consequences, you know, the sky is going to fall, so to speak, right? And sometimes that may be correct, but we may disagree. And if we decide to proceed and charge, we're going to look back and see if the sky in fact fell. And if it didn't, then I think it reduces the credibility of defense counsel in a way that is not good. And so it's far more effective when you're dealing with, at least my office, for folks to come in and say, look, when it comes to collateral consequences, it's unclear. You know, here's why it could be bad, here's why it could be okay, but just tell us straight up what you see. That I think is far more effective when it comes to advocacy than, you know, being maxing out the argument that if you charge this corporation, you know, the sky is going to fall. So I would say if you style your presentations that way, there's going to be more of a conversation. But if you say all the time, the sky's going to fall, at some point we stop listening, and that's not good. So I would just make that last point.
And that's exactly where my next question was going to go, Damian. I appreciate you taking it there already, giving a clear example of what good advocacy or bad advocacy looks like without going into details of particular cases. Certainly, I throw this out to the entire panel. Would you lift up again to this audience of private practitioners good or bad examples of advocacy in this white collar space that you've seen?
Yeah, I don't have much more to add here other than to say again, I think we like to see people coming to us early. We talked about timeliness of self-disclosures. Don't wait until the news is about to come out that, you've already been caught and now you're coming to us to, quote unquote, self-disclose. Come to us early when you find things and let's talk about it. I know that it's not something that you may have traditionally done or been used to doing, but I will say that at this point in time, at least, I can only speak to the Justice Department as now currently situated and the folks who've been working closely on these policies around the country so that we have some standardization and uniformity as to what our responses will be, that we want to hear from you, we want to work through these issues with you to get to the right result. Guilty pleas are not the only option, and we want to talk to you about what the in-between looks like. So I think the right way to approach it is to come to us with sincerity, with some transparency, understanding that you are in the role of the advocate. We still expect you to have some openness with us so that we can get to some middle ground.
One other area I would highlight is, I mentioned it earlier about cooperation, because there are different ways in which companies and defense counsel can cooperate with the investigation. They are all respectable choices, but they all aren't the same. So I'll give you an example. If someone simply responds to a subpoena, that's not the level of cooperation we are talking about when we reference, fully cooperate. But you will have some lawyers who will come in and say, we gave you all these documents, and we'll say, yeah, but we had to ask you for them and pull, it's like pulling teeth. That's an example. Another example is, and I think the department is fairly savvy about these things, is sometimes people make considered judgments to kind of take a wait and see approach with the department. And again, I've been on the other side, and you advise clients about, well, do we go in, or do we do this, do we do that, and what will happen if we don't? One of the things I would say to defense counsel is, that is a respectable dialogue to have. Of course, you must have it, you have to protect your client's interest, but when you make the choice to wait, to not disclose, to let time run, understand that in the department, we see that for what it is, and so at the end, when you're trying to come up with a resolution, you can't call that full cooperation. I just had a circumstance recently where literally there was a year-plus delay, and during that period, my prosecutors were investigating, gathering the evidence, and then when it became clear that we were serious, then we started to get some information, and when it came to the resolution, you're not going to get full cooperation points because you didn't really do all that you could to help advance the investigation, and that's a choice. And I'm not saying that's a choice, but you can't pitch that as full cooperation. Now, on the other hand, I will say for prosecutors, it's important also for us that we listen, we keep an open mind when companies and defense counsel are presenting things to us. We can't make up our minds and say we have a theory and there's nothing that can change that. So in assessing cases and thinking about resolutions, we have to keep an open mind because we want to get to the fair and just result. And so I do think that that's something that we should do. And some of the best presentations, as Damian mentioned, are ones that are nuanced, in which defense counsel acknowledges this might not have been great, but this was great. And you have, because we see it, as well. And so having that kind of discussion, I think you can more readily get to the right solution. The last thing I'll say is to the defense bar, you don't give up on educating prosecutors on issues. One of the things we used to deal with a lot when I was at the law firm, but now in the department, you deal with issues of foreign law that pop up. You deal with challenges of other regimes and their expectations about data privacy, what you can and can't disclose. I do think the department is open to understanding those things and working with companies to try to navigate those issues. So don't give up on the idea of informing us of real impediments and try to work through those things together. So those were things I wanted to mention.
Just one thing I'll add with respect to it, particularly as it relates to the new voluntary self-disclosure policy. When we talk about self-disclosure and we talk about timely and prompt, it doesn't mean that we're asking the defense bar to go and conduct a full, thorough, 100% controlling investigation before they come forward. That's going to obviously take some time if you do that. And part of our policy requires it to be prompt and that the information regarding the misconduct hasn't been disclosed to the government in some other way. So we encourage you to reach out as early as you're aware of sort of the misconduct, knowing fully well that you may not have finished your internal investigation yet. So that is something to keep in mind as it relates to the voluntary self-disclosure. Reach out. Let us know that you're aware of this and you're looking into it and you're going to come back and provide information as it relates to that. So that will be certainly initially showing definitely intent to identify the misconduct, identify those who are involved. And then on the issue of cooperation is, as Breon said, it's continued full cooperation, right? Not waiting and seeing or putting things off arbitrarily, indefinitely, until you realize the heat is coming. We've learned certain things to provide other information. It's continuing full cooperation throughout in order to get the fulfillment of full cooperation. So that's just one of the other points I'd like to add.
All right, enough for the defense bar. We've dropped enough pearls of wisdom. That was well worth your time just for that answer, that set of answers. I want to spend the last few moments here talking to another important part of the audience, and that is the students here. We've got some students who are thinking about their paths forward in the law. Why should they consider becoming prosecutors? Vanessa?
I knew this one was coming to me first. I think we would probably all agree that the prosecutor is the most important person in the criminal justice system. It's no offense to any of the other players, but I think the amount of discretion the prosecutor has is so key and so important to make sure that we have a variety of people with good intentions sitting in these roles. People who care about integrity, who care about the impact in the community, who understand the impact beyond the individuals even in a particular case. Because there are so many considerations that go into which cases we're going to bring, right? Signing off on indictments, looking at what the plea agreements might be if the cases don't go fully to trial, recommendations for sentencing, whether to charge mandatory minimums, whether to charge enhancements in cases, bleeding over into the violent crimes area as well. But when I was a law student, I came to, my path here was a windy one, as many of ours have been. I started on the civil side, and I didn't know that I would be as inspired to work in the criminal sector. So I will say that I am incredibly honored to serve in this role. I think that is incredibly important for more of us who come from very diverse backgrounds, who come from backgrounds that haven't traditionally been represented in prosecutors' offices, to take a turn in these seats, to really help us to transform the criminal justice system in the way that people have been trying to transform it for decades, since the founding of the Justice Department. So I can't underscore how important it is to me and how important it is, I think, to the people in this room to consider serving.
Damian, I suspect, like me, you, when you're asked what's been your best job, you say it's being an AUSA. Certainly not being a U.S. attorney. It comes with a lot of headaches sometimes. Tell me, why should somebody consider becoming an AUSA?
I mean, I think it's the best possible job that you can have in the law. And I say that as someone who didn't know that that was going to be the case. I kind of came in with a little bit of skepticism, like everyone says this is going to be the best, and but I mean, let me see what it's really like. And I could not believe that I got paid to do the work that I was doing. And I didn't check my bank account on paydays because that's not why I was, I always felt like I'd do this job for free. And then there was a government shutdown and I actually was doing it for free. Feels so good. Yeah, it's painful. But seriously, I think that the work of an AUSA is just extraordinary. The amount of judgment that you get to exercise on a daily basis is astounding. But I will also acknowledge that not everyone will reflexively view the job as a job that's going to be an amazing job for them. And I wasn't in that position either. I really did struggle with trying to understand whether being a member of the justice system was the way that I wanted to spend my scarce time on earth. And the way that I resolved that question was by then understanding and thinking about how in my office, and I think it's the same for every office up here, we're looking for people who recognize that struggle, right? Who understand the push and pull and the tension, the enormity of the responsibility, the questions. I mean, that will make you a better prosecutor if you have those thoughts, as opposed to being someone who reflexively likes the idea of prosecuting people. If I'm interviewing someone and they say, I'm really looking forward to putting someone in prison, immediately looking for the exit, right? And I'm sure it's the same thing for all of you. So that's a pitch for why this job is a great one. Why even if you have questions about it or doubts, that doesn't mean that those doubts have to resolve to a no. In fact, that you may be the person we're looking for.
So I'm going to take it a step further, because I affirmatively did not want to be a prosecutor when I was in law school. I was defense-minded. I wanted to be a public defender. I thought prosecutors were bad. You name it. That's how I felt. And it wasn't until I spoke with the judge I clerked for, Sterling Johnson Jr. in the Eastern District of New York, who just passed last year. He was an inspiration in so many ways. His life, he grew up in Bed-Stuy, Brooklyn, during a time where it was a bit rougher than it is now, and had a different path, right? He, was a person that grew up at a time when it was the norm for your teacher or guidance counselor to tell you, he said he wanted to be a lawyer. They told him he should be a carpenter. He went on to go to law school, right? He went to law school at night while he was a police officer. But he was a police officer at a time when he couldn't ride in the patrol car with his white colleague. He graduated at a time when Wall Street law firms weren't open to black lawyers. But yet he persevered. He became a prosecutor in the Southern District of New York, and ultimately the second black judge on the district court in the Eastern District of New York. And he hired me as an intern and as his law clerk. And I was talking to him one day about what I wanted to do. I was ready to leave the law firm and go into public service. And he asked me if I thought about becoming a prosecutor. And I said, no. I sort of reflected back to my law school mentality. I was like, prosecutors, they're bad, And he said, Breon, think about the criminal justice system. Prosecutors have much more power and influence over the system than defense attorneys and judges. He said, you make all the decisions that matter. He said, and you need good people, diverse people, people who are going to be fair on both sides of the aisle, in order for the criminal justice system to work fairly and as intended by the Constitution. And that resonated with me. And I applied to the U.S. Attorney's Office, and like my colleagues, it was a great job actually serving the community, helping people, helping vindicate the rights of victims, helping to protect the community. And when you go into the community, and my colleagues will all sort of echo this, you get the appreciation of people knowing that you're looking out for them, trying to make their neighborhoods, their lives better. But there's another aspect of the U.S. Attorney's Office that we don't talk about as much, but I think it's important for students to understand. We all have civil divisions. We litigate on behalf of the United States, and we do it affirmatively. So we do a lot of work to file lawsuits to protect, as I said, the most vulnerable people in our communities, people who are neglected, people who are overlooked, people who are marginalized. And we do that in a number of important areas. Civil rights cases, filing lawsuits relating to police abuse, and other, discrimination in housing and other areas. We do environmental justice cases. And we all know that communities of color and poor communities are the ones hit most with climate change and environmental challenges. And we also do consumer protection. What can we do to protect the elderly, our children, and others? So those are ways in which we are using the tools of the U.S. Attorney's Office to really make a difference in the community. And one other thing I would mention, we did something recently that I'm proud of, and I hope it will expand. We are worried about gun violence in our communities, of course, and one of the things that we did in addition to prosecuting gun cases, gun trafficking and all, we started a civil initiative to use our civil tools to file lawsuits to try to deal with gun trafficking into our communities. There's no manufacturers in New York, so the guns that are on the streets of New York are coming from elsewhere, both traffickers bringing them in, but also gun manufacturers who are sending materials, including machine guns or machine gun parts into our district. So we filed a lawsuit about that, and I'm very hopeful that that kind of litigation will make a huge difference in protecting our community and keeping our children and folks safe.
Stephanie, we are running short on time, so I will ask to pivot to our final remarks. Just 30 seconds from everybody. We talked about why someone should consider the USA. Let's talk about what they need to do with their, give a concrete piece of advice to an aspiring student who's thinking about this career, specific piece of advice to eventually get to that goal.
I would say seek out a prosecutor, reach out to somebody in the U.S. Attorney's Office, talk to, I have pamphlets from the Northern District of California if you're interested. Actually, I do. But I think it's important to absolutely talk to folks in those areas to find out and get information. Go to the Bar Association, but come and talk to anybody in the U.S. Attorney's Office and any government office, and they can tell you all the, as my colleagues here have said, there are so many important reasons to be a part of the Department of Justice. I am thankful for the longevity I've had in the department because among the things that I've done is I've been able to hire incredibly wonderful people who are thoughtfully minded in the way that we are here to bring it to the Department of Justice, bring it to the Northern District, and so to change ultimately the culture of what the perception is maybe with respect to that.
The pride and joy of every U.S. attorney are the people we hire. And so I will give you just a quick list of advice for those who are interested. First of all, we all have websites, USAO and whatever the initials are for our jurisdiction, CT for me. You can find contact information right there online, lots of good stuff. Intern, extern, talk to people at our office and go out and get some good experience. Most of the AUSA jobs, and at least in our districts represented here, are highly competitive. So you tend to need to have some experience before you can actually start with us. I think that's probably true for most of us, although occasionally we may bring people out of clerkships. So go out and get some good experience. Learn your craft early. There is no substitution. I always tell law students they want to know what the secret is. to being able to have a successful career. Hard work and relationships. You have to put the time in, you have to invest the time, learn your craft, protect your reputation and your integrity, and people will look out for you and help you along the way.
I would say just don't screen yourself out. Just because you may not know someone in the department, that doesn't mean that the department isn't for you. I think that's just a really important thing for folks to keep in mind. And this is not related to DOJ, but a comment about folks screening themselves out. When I was a law clerk at the Supreme Court, we would screen all applicants for future positions. And I remember going through the box looking for the Howard Law graduates and looking for, where's the valedictorian? I'm sure Justice Stevens would be very interested in hiring that person. And I couldn't find the people. And so when I'm looking at applicants for SCNY, I want to see everybody. And if you don't throw your hat in the mix, I'm never going to see you and I'm never going to be able to hire you. So don't screen yourself out.
And I'll just add on to that. I think fundamental to what Damian said is kind of believing in yourself. I think a lot of law students, lawyers of color, worry that they don't belong or cannot achieve jobs in these spaces that we're talking about. Don't give in to that. You have to believe in yourself and you have to put your hat in a ring in order to achieve it. So I encourage everybody to do that. I think we all have done that during our careers, gone after things that people probably discouraged us from going after or told us that we couldn't achieve, and we proved them wrong. So I encourage that. The other thing I would say is do it for the right reasons. We have incredible power and influence over lives, and you must want to do this for the right reasons. To keep the community safe, make people's lives better, you have to be ethical, you have to want to do it and do justice, and that's important. We will screen those people out who had to do it for the wrong reasons, but if you're thinking about it, ask yourself why, and make sure it's for the right reasons. It's for the community, it's for the public.
Join me in thanking our fantastic panel. We are going to break for the next, 25 to 30 minutes. We will get an opportunity. I certainly look forward to meeting as many of our students who are with us during that time. Thank you so much. Look forward to seeing you during the break and at our next panel.